Good evening and welcome to this public hearing. I'll call the public hearing to order under Ordinance 183.01 and ask our council clerk, Mr. Raguse, to call the roll.
Coriel.
Here.
Dunbar.
Here.
Stein.
Here.
Stevens.
Present.
Wilcox.
Here.
Yazano. It's 5 present, Your Honor.
Thank you. We have a quorum and we can proceed. The purpose of this hearing is to examine the impact on our city, our state, and our nation of political influence by corporate entities and big money in connection with the most recent election, and that being the 2014 general election. Corporate entities include business corporations, political action committees, super PACs, 501c4 groups, and unions. We will hear your comments tonight. If you want to make a statement with respect to the impact of money on the 2014 general election, please come to the podium and state your name. As part of our ordinance, we require that you be permitted only to speak up to 5 minutes. And we ask that if you have any comments in writing, if you could give them to the council clerk, Mr. Raguse, that will assist us in preparing the transcript of the minutes of this hearing, which we will prepare and forward on to elected officials as provided in the ordinance. So without anything further, then I'm going to ask anybody that has a comment to make to come to the podium. Again, restrict it to the 2014 general election. Yes, Carla.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Carla Rautenberg. I live at 3065 Berkshire Road. Yesterday was the 5th anniversary of the Citizens United decision. That day simply made evident to the world what a few thoughtful people already knew, that the ill-considered doctrines of corporate personhood and money as speech already enshrined in American law were endangering and could eventually eclipse the constitutional rights of American citizens. Everyone here tonight already knows how Cleveland Heights voters responded to this threat to our democracy. On behalf of Cleveland Heights Move to Amend, I would like to update Council and our fellow citizens about activities around the state and nationally. In the last 5 years, Ohio Move to Amend has grown from a few people meeting at Peace House in University Circle into a statewide organization with affiliated groups in 15 communities and groups starting up in 10 more. We have gotten the Move to Amend calling for a constitutional amendment banning corporate personhood and money as speech and establishing local public hearings such as this one on the ballot in 6 Ohio cities: Brecksville, Newburgh Heights, Cleveland Heights, Defiance, Chagrin Falls, and Mentor. The ordinance is passed easily in all 6 communities. Furthermore, the city councils of 6 additional Ohio communities have passed resolutions fully supporting the Move to Amend, and the city councils of Akron and Cleveland Heights have passed resolutions partially in support. In 2015, the issue could be on the ballot in as many as 5 Ohio cities, with more coming on board in 2016. The 3rd annual statewide gathering of Ohio Move to Amend will be March 28th in Columbus. Please plan to join us. Of course, the Move to Amend is growing nationally as well. In November, there were initiatives on the ballot in 24 communities across the country. In all, more than 600 resolutions and ballot initiatives have passed. And this may be unique. Once it has made it to the ballot, this issue has never failed, not one time. So most American voters know that corporate personhood and money as speech will ultimately destroy democracy. But even so, 3 significant events during 2014 served to remind us. The McCutcheon decision of the Supreme Court increased aggregate contribution, quote unquote, limits on multiple congressional races to the obscene level of $2.4 million per individual every 2 years. With its Hobby Lobby decision, the Supreme Court said that Hobby Lobby's religious beliefs mean that it needn't provide employees with access to birth control as mandated by the Affordable Care Act. The PD's Cheryl Harris noted, Your craft store is more pious than you are, unquote. And finally, at the very end of the year, the federal budget bill passed by Congress included an increase of 800% on the limits to individual contributions to political parties, from $97,000 to $776,000 per contributor. They just couldn't help themselves, or rather, they did. So this is our system, and it is up to us as Americans to change it. Thank you, council members and fellow citizens, for being here tonight and for being the change you want to see.
Thank you. Mr. Lampkin.
Thank you, Carl.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Calvin Lampkin. I live at 1582 Crest Road. And I'm here just for a moment to say that if the post office is big business, then that's the reason I stopped voting in the year 2014. I have no plans to continue voting because if I don't have the right to sleep properly because of being awakened by big business, I don't think my vote matters at all. And when I come and speak to council, I think big business, because it was council and big business that created the issue that's been ignored for 15, 16 years. And it amazes me that when I'm speaking here and I look into all of you eyes, you look like bright people. I mean, you look very bright, but when a 5-year-old can understand it, then I don't get you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Who wants to be next? Go ahead. I'm sorry, I just called on somebody else. We'll get you next. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you very much for letting me talk with you this evening. We're focused today on, I'm Lois Romanoff, by the way, sorry. And I used to live in Cleveland Heights. I lived here for almost 30 years. I now live in Cleveland. My daughter went to the Cleveland Heights High School, and all of her friends did, and they did very well. In fact, they went to all the Cleveland Heights schools and did very well, and that's my concern this evening. I'm concerned about the privatization of the public schools. And I would like to talk to you a little bit about that. It certainly is an issue which affects local politics and our local communities, and it is undermined by corporate money. There really is a war right now going on against public schools, and I passed this out. It was created by the Heights Coalition for Public Education. It's extremely well written, and there's a lot of great information in it, so I hope you'll take a time to read it. And there are 2 meetings listed in it under the Add Your Voice column, and the first one is coming up on the 28th, next week, Wednesday, I think, is what that is, The Myth of the Failing Teacher. The goal of the goal is right now privatization. And high-stakes testing is part of this effort. This means teachers and schools are being evaluated by their students' test scores, often resulting in teachers being fired and schools being closed and given to charters, to private operators. Charter schools are corporations. They are called public community schools most of the time, when they are called corporations when they are in the courts of law. They are funded by taxpayers, so that money comes from the same pot, their money comes from the same pot of money that the public district schools comes from. The Cleveland Heights, University Heights, in Cleveland Heights, University Heights, there are no charter schools. But there are over 400 students living in Cleveland Heights who attend charter schools in Ohio. Ohio has about 390 charters. Of those, 4 out of 5 are failing. 23 of those schools are performing at an average to above average range. Many Cleveland Heights, University Heights students are attending failing charter schools. 1/3 of Ohio's charters are for profit. Funds, which should be devoted to the classroom, are used to advertise, recruit, lobby, and gain profits. Last year, the 2 biggest for-profit school operators in Ohio, David Brennan, the owner of Hope Academies and Life Skills, and William Lager, who owns ECOT, Electronic College of Tomorrow, together gave over $100 million to the Republican Party as campaign contributions. And in return, the Ohio Republican legislature continues to not investigate the wrongdoings of the charter schools. If you follow the money to see who is pushing the privatization of our public schools, it is hedge fund managers, Pearson Testing Corporation, Bill Gates selling needed technology in order to test the Common Core, to use the Common Core, because to take the Common Core you have to use technology. The Walmart Foundation and the Eli Broad Foundation, there are many other. Those are the 3 big foundations. These are corporate educational so-called reformers who are saying that our public schools are failing. But in fact, our traditional public schools are not failing. They are working very well for most students. Graduation rates are at an all-time high. More young people than ever are entering college. Even more would be going to college if the costs were not so high. Teachers and unions...
You have about 30 seconds to wrap up.
Okay. Teachers and unions are being blamed for this problem, but they are not the cause of the problem. The cause of the problem, and is generally in inner cities and inner ring suburbs like Cleveland Heights, are poverty, a lack of state funding, and segregation. So what I'm asking is that we not abandon this very important public institution that is really one of our last remaining public institutions where we meet each other and contribute to getting to know each other.
Thank
Thanks. Besides the post office, right.
All right. Anybody else have a comment about money in politics in the 2014 election? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Sally Hanley, and I live at 2577 Overlook Road, and I better talk fast. I'm going to talk about climate change, and of all the huge issues we face, climate change is the most daunting in terms of what we're already facing, in terms of crazy weather and the predictions of what may happen in the future. We hear 2 things about climate change. One, that there's scientific consensus that it's occurring and that human activity is largely the cause. And 2, that it's a hoax and the data's not clear. So I wanted to know how we know there is scientific consensus.
Excuse me. Could you at least relate this somehow to money in politics in the 2014 election?
I will.
Okay. Thank you.
I very definitely will. Okay. So I binged scientific consensus on climate change, and I'll summarize what was found on the NASA site. It stated that 97% of climate scientists agree the climate is warming and very likely due to human activity. Let's see. Also, there was that report last year, the UN Governmental Panel of Climate Change, that said warming is unequivocal and it's extremely likely that human influence has been dominant since 1950. So we know that climate change is happening, and with it comes drastic results. So we're in high gear to deal with this, right? No, we're not. We're not doing nearly enough. But at least our elected officials are certainly doing their best to deal with this problem, right? No, wrong again. While according to a Common Cause report, whose government, whose voice, 2 out of 3 people believe in global warming and want emission controls, but a large portion of the U.S. Congress are climate change deniers, including, according to this report, 9 out of 10 Republican members. According to a report titled How Big Business is Funding Climate Change Denial in the 113th Congress and Why It Should Stop, climate deniers received $100 million in campaign contributions from special interests. And this was only the midterm election. Imagine how much they'll spend in a presidential election. And this $100 million also doesn't include the so-called dark money from special interests that don't have to report their donors. The report mentions that 160 congresspersons are in a climate denier caucus. I'll quote just a few of the members who received large donations. Darrell Issa said, "There's a wide range of opinions and no agreement." Dave Camp said, "There remains a great deal of uncertainty." Kathy McMorris Rogers, "Gore gets an F in science." Clearly, from what I said before, these people are either ignorant of what the vast majority of scientists say, or they're willfully ignoring them, and you have to ask why. Another article I looked at said, that was entitled Koch Pledge Tied to Congressional Climate Inaction, and this was printed in the New Yorker. For people who don't know, Koch Industries is a multinational corporation. They're involved in refining and distribution of oils, chemicals, energy, a whole bunch of other things. The EPA reported that in 2011, they emitted over 24 million tons of CO2. This is the equivalent of 5 million cars. According to a report I cited above, the Koch brothers alone spent $6.4 million in the 2014 elections. Probably not coincidentally, they got 411 elected officials nationwide to sign a pledge to vote against legislation related to climate change unless there's an equal amount of tax cuts. This would be practically impossible because most of the solutions to mitigate climate change are going to cost money. So this, in effect, pretty much stops that. These 411 office holders were at the federal, state, and even local levels. 1/3 of the House of Representatives and 1/4 of the Senate have signed this pledge. This does not bode well for the earth and we humans, and it shows why we need to have a constitutional amendment that corporations aren't people and money doesn't equal speech, because obviously the amount of money, they are truly running amok in our democracy. And it's clear that they are the ones who have the ears of our elected representatives and not us.
Thank you. Yes.
My name is David Berenson. I live at 3321 Silsby Road in Cleveland Heights. First, thank you to Mayor and Council for hosting this event, but I'd also like to thank all of the Cleveland Heights voters who voted in last year. The notion that corporations are not people and money is not speech. I'd also like to thank a couple of local businesses who have donated some items here because we were hoping to get student involvement. And I do have some donated Funny Times from the longtime Cleveland Heights business, the Funny Times, as well as some gift certificates from Max Backs and Big Fun. So I think locally owned businesses are a great alternative to the multinational corporations that all too often run our lives and run our governments. Last year at this Democracy Day, I spoke on a whole range of corporate control in various industries, including healthcare, pharmaceuticals, weapons industries, energy industries, that I think are top the list of industries and corporate control that is mostly abusive to our health and our economy. But tonight I'm going to focus only on one aspect, the state of our healthcare system. As this continues to negatively impact not only myself and my family, but also many of the kids and families I work with in school and social service settings. One thing I mentioned last year was that I had previously had a job where I worked within the health insurance industry, where I learned from the inside that it's a regular, normal practice of health insurance companies to deny claims that they should be covering. And that's the way they raise their profits. And at the time, there were no laws against that. I hope there are now in at least some states. Recently, I've been introduced to the Affordable Care Act, which I now refer to as the Not So Affordable Care Act. This is because my company, for which I've been employed for over 15 years, has changed insurance plans at least 7 times in that time. And most recently, twice they changed the plans in October and then December. In an effort to get us employees the best deal, they're doing this, they're changing this. The problem I ran into, though, is that I have to change doctors each time they change, most of the time. I have to start over each year with new deductibles, and now I'm going to be running into a $5,000 deductible. And because the way they figure it out under the Affordable Care Act, and by the way, I'm going to tie this into the elections and finance at the end, is that because of the way they figure out the percentage of my gross salary, I am offered affordable care for myself because it's under the percentage. However, in addition to paying this large deductible and waiting and having to make decisions based on my health care, based on whether I can afford it, I also am married and have a child. And the way they figure it, the plan for my company is not affordable for my family. So it leaves us having to cover ourselves separately, and it means that I can't even get any subsidy or even apply through the Affordable Care Program for my insurance options. They can, but they have to include our total family income in trying to figure out whether they can get a subsidy, even though I'm not going to be covered. So this is a kind of a loophole that we're just finding out about because of this recent number of changes in my insurance plan that's offered by my company. So again, we're all going to have to be making decisions based on separate deductibles, high costs of health insurance and health care. And I can only imagine how many other people are caught in such loopholes. I don't have to imagine what level of influence the health insurance industry had on the development of the Affordable Care Act. We all know that they have a powerful influence over state and federal governments. And how much influence they will continue to have as the Affordable Care Act continues to get challenged and things get changed.
You have about 20 seconds to wrap up.
Okay. I will end there then.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good health to you all.
Thanks. Who wants to be next? Go ahead.
If
Yes,
anybody
sir.
wants some funny times, I got it.
Hi, my name is Stuart Robinson. I've been living at 3334 Berkeley for over 50 years. I'm going to speak about the mortgage crisis and predatory lenders and the costs to the city. When Maureen O'Neill became chief
And
code official...
you're going to tie that to the 2014 election.
Okay.
Right.
When Maureen O'Neill became chief code official and neighborhood improvement coordinator in Youngstown a few years ago, she noted that many homes were blighted and in desperate need of repair. She and her staff found that in many cases, the former owners were behind in their mortgage payments and were evicted by the lenders who failed to complete the foreclosure form. So the city thought that they were still owned by the former occupants. These are referred to as zombie foreclosures. Thus, the city assumed the vacant parcel was still the property of the former owners. The city had to perform basic maintenance, such as lawn mowing, snow shoveling, and minor structural repairs, which on a citywide basis totaled over $100,000 per year, and the city had to assume the cost. As a solution, the city enacted legislation that required lenders, at the moment the house became vacant, or if it was already vacant, to purchase a $10,000 bond. If the lender maintained the property until it was once again inhabited, the city would return the funds. If the city incurred expenses maintaining the property until it was occupied again, this amount would be deducted from the return. The success of this law encouraged other cities, including Warren, Ohio, Canton, Ohio, and Poughkeepsie, New York, to enact similar laws. If Cleveland Heights does not yet have such a law in its books, I hope it would do so quickly. And another benefit of this law is that it discourages lenders to lower their predatory loan rates.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Valerie Robinson. I live at 3334 Berkeley also for 40 years. Anyway, a long time. And I'm going to talk on the same subject that Sally was speaking on, cheating the school kids. Corporations don't pay their state taxes either. We usually hear about federal. Okay, they don't pay their state taxes. And of course, these corporations have all, I'll tie it right in right away.
Great.
They don't, you know, they have a lot of influence at the state level on elections. And I just think you as a body, elected body of Cleveland Heights, I bet you could have a lot of influence at the state level too. You have a staff and influencing these, the laws. Okay. Okay, the effects of state tax avoidance are seen all around the country with impacts on schools and pensions and housing. It's hard for a nation to build work skills when its corporations, the beneficiaries of half a century of public support, have largely stopped paying for education. Most of the attention to corporate tax avoidance is directed at the non-payment of federal taxes, but state taxes, which to a much greater extent fund K through 12, are avoided at a stunning rate by America's biggest corporations. And as a result, public school funding continues to be cut, and the worsening performance of neglected schools adds fuels to the reckless demands for privatization. Inner city schools are being devastated by this insidious process. So there's a report, 2011 report by Citizens for Tax Justice, showed that corporations pay less than half of their required state taxes, which in addition to K through 12, provide a significant part of pension funding. So some of the big ones were Boeing, Caterpillar, Verizon, and Google. As a result of the decline in state tax money, education gets cut. Overall spending on K through 12 fell in 2011 for the first time since the Census Bureau began keeping records, well, 3 decades ago. The cuts have continued to the present day. The effects of state tax avoidance are seen all around the country with impacts on schools and pensions and housing. In Brown versus the Board of Education, Chief Justice Earl Warren said, education is perhaps the most important function of state and local governments. It is a right which must be made available to all. Education in the 50s and beyond trained the engineers and medical specialists and mathematicians who built our technology and healthcare and financial industries. But with the help of failed government, corporations are doing whatever they can to avoid the responsibility of sustaining our public school system. They are starving the children instead. And I would just like to give you, here's a rundown of some Ohio corporate headquarters and their 3-year tax rate from 2008 to 2010. And don't forget, the average tax rate is 7.2%. And I don't really know where in Ohio. These are American Electrical Power pays minus 1.7% of its however that is handled. Cliffs Natural Resources pays 0.6%. American Financial Group pays 0.7%. Macy's, I didn't know that was headquartered in Ohio, pays 1.3%. J.M. Smucker, we know them, 2.1%. Limited Brands, 2.8%. First Energy only pays 2.9%. Procter & Gamble, 3.1%. Sherwin-Williams, 3.1%. Kroger's, 3.3%. Big Lots, 3.8%. Cardinal Health, 4.0%, and Parker Hannifin, 4.8%. So the average state corporate tax rate is 6.2%. And this report is from Corporate Tax Dodging in the 50 States, 2008 through 2010. and this is a report written in 2011 from ITEP, the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy. So, as I said at the beginning, to tie it in, I think you as a body should be going up to our legislature in the state, and especially since our schools here are impacted, and you should be having your say with our state legislators instead of letting the corporations have their way. And of course, we should be pushing for move to amend, which we did here. Thank goodness.
You. Thanks. Greg.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. My name is Greg Coleridge, live at 3016 Somerton Road, Cleveland Heights, and I too wish to thank you for your support of this, as well as the voters of the city of Cleveland Heights in passing issue 32 a couple of years ago. Princeton and Northwest University researchers in a study published this past September, may have missed it, concluded that after extensive analysis of nearly 1,800 public policy issues, concluded that, in fact, the United States is, in fact, an oligarchy and not a democracy. This was looking at these issues between 1981 and 2002. The study was entitled Testing Theories of American Politics, Elites, Interest Groups, and American Citizens, Average Citizens. And it said, quote, Americans do enjoy many features central to democratic governance. However, majorities of the American public actually have little influence over the policies our government adopts. When the preferences of economic elites and the stands of organized interest groups are controlled for, the preferences of the average American appear to have only a minuscule, near zero, statistically non-significant impact upon public policy, unquote. Now, this study, while done last year, analyzed these policies that ended in 2002, which was 8 years before the Citizens United decision, 12 years before the McCutcheon decision, 12 years before the Senate rider that extended the contribution limits to political parties that was previously referred to. I mean, what it shows is that, at least at the federal and state level, I believe that democracy is more an illusion than a fact. And I think the numbers bear out when you look at the spending of the federal elections over the last couple of years, in particular last year, where we saw a continued trend, midterm elections. The 2014 midterm elections were the highest of midterms of ever. But what was different, what broke the trend in 2014, is that there were fewer big-time contributors or investors, depending on how you want to look at it. Before, it used to be larger number of extremely super-duper wealthy individuals giving more money in bigger chunks. But now it's smaller number of people giving even larger chunks. So merely the wealthy are having their voices drowned out. Never mind our voices being drowned out, but even the wealthy. The problems associated with this, you've heard some, you'll hear more, but they don't only affect us, they affect you as public elected officials. Certainly the cuts we have seen, and there probably will be more that you have had to deal with at the state level, coming down from the state, those are real. And they take the form of austerity measures that certainly impact citizens but affect you as public officials in trying to balance budgets. And what that does is, whether it's done intentionally or not, is it's creating sort of a system where communities are put into having to sell off public assets to the lowest, the lowest bidder. That's what is called privatization, or maybe more accurately, corporatization. The good news is that there are people waking up. The awareness of the issues continue. The awareness of the core problem associated with this continues, which is never intended constitutional rights for corporations and big money in elections. The idea behind what we have done here in Cleveland Heights and others around the state and the country in promoting Move to Amend is not just focusing on changing the players of the game. That's what elections are about. Or changing the plays of the game. That's what laws, statutes, and regulations are about. It's focused on changing the rules of the game, because the rules of the game are rigged and stacked against us. Quite honestly, they're stacked against you. And so it is therefore why we think that to the extent that you can, and you know you've got all kinds of other issues, this is not your first issue. Understand, respect that. However, those of you who are public officials here in town and maybe also administrators, you come into contact with your peers. There's probably other mayors that, Mr. Mayor, you deal with in this county, across the state. City council persons deal with your peers in other facets, in other circles. To the extent that you have time, that you have a moment while you're dealing with other more salient local issues, we call on you to do what you can to help us as we build a social movement to try to change the rules of the game. And that can specifically take the form, and I'll end here, of there are move to amend efforts right now going on in Shaker Heights, in South Euclid, in Lyndhurst, in the city of Cleveland, in Berea, and Parma, and certainly in other parts of the state. You have a county council here. There are federal elected officials that obviously you're going to be sending something to. So we ask you to do what you can to bring this issue up for them and to work with us to bring this issue to the fore and to try to pass something in their community.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else? Yeah, Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. My name is Dean Seek. I live at 2547 Bolton Road for the past 5 years and 35 years before that on Rydal Mount. We gather tonight as a group of concerned citizens who believe that we have power. Indeed, that is why this city, like so many others, passed move to amend so overwhelmingly. The U.S. Constitution grants citizens the right to self-government expressed through representative democracy in our 3 branches of government. But citizens' desires may affect corporate profits, and that is the basic issue I'm here to address. What if our government gave up our right to make laws that protect and benefit we the people? Worse yet, what if the new government that assumed that right to make the laws that affect us all were a group of corporations with one objective only, maximizing their profit? That is the issue at stake in multinational trade agreements, such as the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP. As a means of maximizing corporate power, trade agreements create governing bodies that override laws passed by nations. A process established by the World Trade Organization has the power to demand compensation from taxpayers of any nation that deprives any other member nation of, quote, expected future profits, unquote. A complaining corporation need only request that its government sue for such grievance. The suit can target any law at any level, local, state, or national, and the complainant need show only that such law might deprive the corporation of profits. These suits are not held in courts of law or before judges of any nation. They are held in private tribunals where 3 attorneys unaccountable to any electorate render their final decisions behind closed doors. The only parties who can initiate challenges are, surprise, corporations, and no redress is allowed by others who may be affected, such as workers or small business owners. A defendant country found guilty is expected to rewrite or nullify the law. Right now, hundreds of multinational corporations from various countries are seeking redress through such processes. For example, this process has been used to place in jeopardy a law passed in the U.S. that requires meat sold here to identify its country of origin because meat packers in Canada and Mexico brought suit. Such processes as this will be employed through the Trans-Pacific Partnership, The TPP would create an unprecedented power grab by corporations over the people of 14 nations that border the Pacific Ocean, including the U.S. Regrettably, President Obama is convinced of the TPP's merit, and it will thus be sold to the Congress, the new Congress from 2014, and the American people as, what else? A jobs bill. However, of the 29 chapters in the TPP, only 5 of them concern trade. The other 24 detail just how the corporate cabal will be freed of any accountability to the citizens of any of its member nations. The potential results of this agreement will be disastrous for citizens and will include the following: striking down any programs that favor local or national producers, setting a low bar for labor and environmental policies, extending patent monopolies for drugs produced by pharmaceutical makers, which will result in continued and expanded high prices, and, of course, permitting big banks to operate at will with the taxpayers holding the bag for any future failures. Through the 6-year process that created this behemoth, our lawmakers have been denied access to any of the proceedings until last June.
Could you wrap
Only
it up?
corporations and their agents have been permitted involvement in the process. But we, the people, can stop this madness. Soon, President Obama will ask for something called fast-track authority, which would permit him to act alone on behalf of the Congress and you and me.
Could you wrap it up? Sorry.
Yes. He must not get it. I urge you to become educated about the TPP. Go online. Use the resources provided by Public Citizen, citizentrade.org. One county in Wisconsin has already become a TPP-free zone. 30 years ago, I helped Cleveland Heights become a nuclear-free zone.
Thank you.
This threat is every bit as dire.
Thank you. Okay. Anyone else want to speak? Yes.
Whatever you prefer. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. My name's Ann Caruso. I live at 2273 Belfield Avenue. And I just want to talk about the result of legislation in 2014. In 2008, Ohio passed a Renewable Energy and Conservation Standards Bill, 221, and it was passed in our legislature with all but one vote, so almost unanimously. Polls repeatedly show that Ohioans favor renewable energy by at least 72%. So renewable energy is very popular in Ohio. Our renewable energy standards are extremely conservative. They're very, very low compared to other states. They're among the lowest in the country. So they're not putting big demands on the energy companies. They call for just 12.5% of our energy coming from renewable energy sources by 2025, and conservation being increased by 22% by 2025. So those are not, outlandish demands. The bill was passed in 2008, and when it was passed, or since it was passed, it increased Ohio's renewable energy generation from less than 9 megawatts to 429 megawatts of wind and 25 megawatts of solar. It created 25,000 new jobs. It created 400 new companies in renewable energy and conservation. It took 9,000 tons of nitrogen oxide and 10,000 tons of sulfur dioxide emissions out of our air, which translates, of course, to cleaner air and better health. The Ohio Manufacturing Association also said that it, help consumers save $2 for every $1 spent on efficiency programs. So that's from the Ohio Manufacturers Association, not exactly a liberal radical group. Once it was passed, our 4 energy corporations got to work. They raised $2.7 million, dispersed it to the Republicans and the Democrats in our legislature. Not evenly, but they did fund both sides of the aisle. And last year in June, our legislature passed SB 310, which froze those renewable energy standards. We can't say that those campaign contributions are a direct result of SB 310 being passed. There's no way of really knowing that. But on the face of it, the plain dealer was against SB 310. Religious coalitions were formed and lobbied against SB 310. The Manufacturers Association, consumer associations. The only loud voice for it was, of course, the energy companies.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yeah, I just wanted to remind you, if you do have written remarks that you've given, if you can give them to our clerk of council, it'll just help us prepare the minutes. Thank you.
Does anybody need a bathroom break? There seems to be an air of anxiety and nervousness about time. So I just wanted to ask.
I'm not sure where you're getting that, but the
Okay.
5-minute limit
and I
is in
do-
the ordinance, just so you know.
I do know that, and I do want to ask that I'm not interrupted because I do have a point.
Okay.
I'll get there, I promise. My name is Susan Miller. I live at 3165 Berkshire Road. Since 1972, when a group of Cleveland Heights citizens gathered to study and then enforce the Fair Housing Act in our community, we have held their actions in high regard. They were congratulated and thanked for their service to this community by council on the advent of their 40th anniversary here in this chamber 2 years ago. I am speaking, of course, of Heights Community Congress. Anybody from Heights Community Congress, raise your hand. Okay. But here, in this very same community, is a corporation that flaunts the Fair Housing Act. Indeed, they advertise right on their web pages that they are not bound by the Fair Housing Act. The business is Executive Arrangements, 2460 Fairmount Boulevard, Suite 205 in Cleveland Heights. Here's what I found when I visited their website among the descriptors there. We share objective and honest data so families can make informed choices. Well, data can be overwhelming, so combing through city data or Zillow listings could be time-consuming. But then there's this, not bound by Fair Housing Act laws which force realtors to neutralize information on neighborhoods and schools. While it is good to know that executives who contribute to our region's vitality and wealth have a welcome wagon to help them transition to their new homes, it is not good to know that this organization sells itself by stating upfront that it is not bound by the law. They seem to be saying to the elite classes they serve, because you are elite, different rules apply. And so, as it pertains to cities and our respective municipal revenue coffers, the persistence of inequality and corporate privileges resides with us, because justice applies to some and not to others, apparently. What applies to John Doe doesn't apply to this corporation, and we are all complicit in their impunity. Why? Because they represent the corporate clientele we so ardently wish to attract, those whose innovation, brilliance, wealth we all wish to share. Just this past year, a plan was floated to build on the Portage Escarpment to attract wealthy residents who could bolster our municipal coffers. Would the high-dollar Turkey Ridge condos be a place that Executive Arrangements could steer wealthy executives to live? Perhaps. But would they, with impunity, in private, tell potential recruits that they should figure on sending their children to private school if they live in our community? It's difficult to know, but they seem to indicate that they have that privilege, a privilege not afforded the realtor. When laws are passed, campaigns are mounted to convince us one way or another. Our Chamber of Commerce is inevitably involved in swaying public opinion in favor of their needs and desires. Subsidies and tax abatements are handed out like party favors. Roads are built, stadia are outfitted anew, convention center authorities are dissolved overnight, and new language sidesteps the law. Opinions are sold to the public by the Chamber, and laws and taxes are determined by the collective power of the regional chamber. Who pays for these roads, these convention centers, hotels, new developments? Why? John Doe, the taxpayer, of course. It appears that the corporate elite among us have become so comfortable in their power and impunity that they can advertise it, and we remain silent. We pay, and we do not question. Hence, money is speech. We are led by the corporate media, who is directed by the Growth Coalition, whose executives are carefully steered to this or that protected enclave to vote, and again, to tax ourselves so that the corporations may continue to instruct us as to what we, or is it they, need. This is not democracy, it is a corporatocracy.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
My name is Fran Mensch. I live at 3060 Chelsea Drive in Cleveland Heights. A city changes slowly and in a way that is too confusing and disordered for the people who live there to clearly understand. So we humans usually have to make up our own narratives about how, when, and why our city changed. But in the case of Cleveland Heights, the how, when, and why of our city's current economic problems, and some people say decline, can be identified precisely and easily. The decline started in 2010 when the Oakwood Country Club, former Oakwood Country Club, was put up for sale.
Could you limit your comments to the subject at hand?
It is connected, if you give me time to speak.
Okay.
The decline started in 2010. The Oakwood Country Club was for sale, and it was not sold until December of 2010, about a year later. And during the course of that year, citizens worked with the Trust for Public Land, who optioned the property. Citizens asked repeatedly for City Council at that time and that to work with the Trust for Public Land and Metro Parks toward the purchasing of the former Oakwood Country Club and turning it into a Metro Park. But everyone in leadership in this room currently and the former individuals, Ed Kelly, Bonnie Kaplan, Mark Tumio, and Ken Motlak, and the missing members are all directly responsible for that, as leadership for that refusal, as is Bob Downey, who was the city manager at that time.
I'm seeing a real tough time connecting this to the 2014 election.
Respectfully, Mr. Wilcox, you are taking up my time.
Well, you're not getting to the topic of the ordinance.
Am I finished?
If you want to be.
I'm not finished. If you please let me get to that
Tie
connection.
it into the election or you will be finished.
Yeah.
I think that's really outrageous. You didn't interrupt anyone else.
I've told other people to stay on to the topic.
You turned your back on the warm glow, on the citizens to face the smoky promises and the warm glow of the promise from First Interstate. We could have had an acacia in our community. Instead, Oakwood was sold for $4 million. $4 million is all it was. That's nothing. It was dug up for a Walmart. That Walmart moved from Severance Town Center, and now Severance is in foreclosure and soon to be auctioned off. This relationship between government and business versus citizens continues today. When you continue to offer tax abatements to developers to build housing that there's no market for, and that research shows that residential abatement has no demonstrable benefit. You, as our government, have ceded your leadership to businesses and have forgotten that your responsibility is to people and the long-term welfare of the community. Thank you. I do have a question. Is this being taped?
Minutes of this will be available at the end of the, I think, 2 weeks or something like that. And it is being taped, yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Sorry. Diane Hallam, 1059 Oxford Road. I would like to start off pointing about the money effect on the 2014 election, in that Janine Boyd, who was put in her position not through the election process, appointed by council to fill a vacant seat, decides to run for re-election unopposed, primarily in a community because of her name and her mother's name, because everyone knew there was no way they could fight the Democratic Party. I'm speaking, please.
Excuse me, but that does not have a direct relationship, since you said something to me when I was whispering to my colleague, out of respect to you. The respect you should have for people is that we follow the elective process, and the legislation that was passed on this tonight specifically spoke to the fact that your comments should address how corporations take over the process.
Okay, the
Janine's
corporation
election had nothing to do with a corporation. But you want to allege that there's some nefarious scheme here. There's no scheme.
See, this example is exactly where I was leading. The organization that seems to control the fact that a woman decides to run for her seat on council a week after swearing in for that position, after being reelected, announces her run for Congress, taking over her mother's seat, now leaving an empty seat right here. And who will elect this representative who will now sit in that seat for the next 4 years? You will. Not the citizens in this city.
I'm
and
sorry,
that will be
in the fall of 2015, that seat will be up for election. It'll only be for a few short months.
okay. Well, that's good to hear. That I didn't know. But this goes back to, again, the influence of money on elections in this city. And primarily, it comes from the Ohio Democratic Party and the Cleveland Heights Democratic Party. I started my review for this speech by looking at campaign donations. And I'm surprised at how thick those documents are when I print them out from the Board of Elections. And then when you look at the percentages of those who donate, who do not live in this city, do not work in this city, but they end up on a lot of contracts. They have involved in the development of properties that countless citizens stand up and speak out against, but are voted for by council. The amount of money that exchanged hands during these elections, since I can't get the 2014 finance records yet, they're not available yet. I have to refer back to those of the past. And there were thousands of dollars that each member would exchange with the Ohio Democratic Party for literature and postage. Individually, each of them spent about $3,000 to $5,000 giving it to the Ohio Democratic Party in Columbus, not here, Columbus, for literature and mailing. Those were blanket mailings. It's like flooding our community. They, in turn, were receiving donations as well from the Democratic Party. When it comes to free speech in an election cycle, the only people who have speech are those who are aligned with the Ohio Democratic Party. Those who don't have close ties with that party can't get elected, with the exception of Mary Dunbar. And I got to applaud her. Of her donors, only 4% were outside of Cleveland Heights. She used only Cleveland Heights vendors for her literature and her mailing. The other members of the council, their donations are about 50% from people who do not live in this city. And they used the Columbus, Ohio Democratic Party to pay for their literature
you have about 20
and their
seconds
mailing.
to wrap up.
This is a corporate money power situation that if you are not a party member of the Democratic Party and you are not a donor to one of your campaigns, you don't get on any of the committees.
Could you
Everyone on the planning committee are
you wrap it up,
donors.
please?
I'm still
Your time's
speaking.
up.
You interrupted me in the beginning. I'm going to keep
I've
speaking.
given you extra time.
Everyone who is on the planning commission are donators to you guys, every one of you. And people who suddenly show up on the list suddenly make a donation, say, that year.
Your time is up, please.
I will now speak about Joseph Shafran, a person
your
who
time
received
is
the
up.
Turkey
Could you
Ridge
at least please
Community
respect
Reinvestment Area,
ordinance that you're supposed to
who
be
donated
here
money
and talk about?
to several people in the 2011
Could
election
we,
and got the Turkey Ridge Community Reinvestment Area.
Either let somebody else come up and
citizens.
speak, or the hearing's going to be concluded. Everybody was to get 5 minutes to give everybody an opportunity
Well, when you
to
two keep
speak.
interrupting me while I
I
was
gave you
speaking.
extra time. I took that into account.
Mayor, I have
Yes.
to leave to
All
another
right.
engagement.
Thank you. We have other members that have other meetings they have to attend to, so we will excuse them. Anybody else? I'm sorry?
Does the ordinance allow council members to speak also?
We'll get to that at the end. Yes. Good evening.
My name is Harriet Applegate. I live at 1522 Crest Road. And I'm actually here as the Executive Secretary of the North Shore AFL-CIO. And I just want to make a quick clarification. Even though unions are considered to be covered by the Citizens United decision and, is able to give unlimited money, I think it's important to point out that unions are against Citizens United 1,000%, and across the nation, because the sheer amount of money that corporations give pour into the political process. No union, no worker, no international union, no matter how large, could ever even begin to dream that they could make a difference when it's compared to corporate money. So I just want to come to clarify that unions are not for Citizens United, and that we are very happy that this city, my city, passed this ordinance, and I couldn't be more pleased. And I'm also wanted to thank you very much for having a hearing. I know it was in the ordinance, but it's really great that you're having this hearing. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
I'm Nina McClellan. I used to live in Cleveland Heights, but I do have an investment property in Cleveland Heights, 2924 East Derbyshire. I wasn't going to speak, but the 2014 election, I've been active in local things as much as I could be, and was a neighborhood leader in the 2008 campaign. I just want to say that the money in politics and the influence of corporations has made me so discouraged that I don't feel so much part of the process anymore. I think all of us know that in this last election, we were flooded, our emails were flooded, our phones were flooded for begging for contributions over and over and over again. I'm a registered Democrat, so I got some calls from the Republicans too, actually, but mainly from all levels of the Democratic Party, federal and state and local, and it was just overwhelming. And I gave what I could, but I knew that it wasn't going to make much difference, that the amount of money from the enormous givers just overwhelms what we citizens can do, or even the unions. So when I registered voters too, I think I see more and more cynicism about what is happening. And as Greg said, I think the citizens know it, but confirmed by academics, that we have lost, not just are losing, but at this point probably have lost what we thought we had in a democratic system. So I think that if we can all work together and put our energies into efforts like Move to Amend, that's what we have to do. We, the people, coming together to reclaim what we have lost, because I think most of us are feeling that our elected officials have been bought off and spend, what is it, something like 90% of their time trying to raise money for their upcoming election. And so what time do they have to focus on the people's business and represent our interests? So I'm hoping things will change, and I think it's exciting that Move to Amend is catching on and really moving across the country in so many communities, and this is what we have to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, before I conclude the hearing, I want to make sure anybody on council.
I'd like to make a statement.
Yeah, that's, go ahead.
Move to Amend made a significant stride in getting council to be educated about the legislation that passed at a national level and how it potentially affects the community. In our holding the public hearing that not only looks at the letter of the law but the spirit of the law, we ask people to focus on things that make it feel like corporations are taking over the process, not personal vendettas on specific issues. So in the future, we'd like to encourage you to come and speak or to call us, but to focus on the things, especially in relationship to this Move to Amend. If you didn't like something we did in the past, feel free to come and address us on that issue, but realize that you'll have a limited amount of time on that issue. We'd like to fully expand how we help you move forward with this. So, for example, Greg's comments that led us in steps on how to do something that makes a positive change for this community and other communities in this state, or Nina's statement about us believing in the process and helping other good people to find what we should do. That's what we need from you. If you want us to respond so that we can help you move forward with this, and you want us in our personal time when we meet other elected officials to encourage them to believe that this is the way their community should go, or on a county level or on a state level, how we should interact, especially with members of the other party, because this will not be approved at a state level exclusively by Democrats in a legislature that is primarily Republican. We must find friends and people who believe in basic American statutes and the principles that most of us were raised on, and find commonalities that will help them vote to support things that are really about why America belongs to Americans, not to corporations. Thank you.
Thanks. Jeff, did you have something?
Could I ask a question?
No, this is a public hearing for this purpose, so we'll tape it, and at the end, we can talk afterwards.
Just about
No, we're not going to do that.
the 5 minute.
It's in the statute. It's in the ordinance.
Oh, is it?
Yes. I've said that several times. It's part of the ordinance. Yes, Jeff.
I just want to thank everyone for participating. I want to applaud your spirit of independent thinking and belief in democracy, and you're caring about the future of our political process. And it makes me proud to be a resident of Cleveland Heights and a member of council to attend this event because it celebrates our tradition of believing in social justice and equality and freedom of speech and all of those things that we stand for, and our goal of being a progressive, socially just, diverse, and sustainable community. So I'm happy that you are all here. It inspires me and makes me proud to be part of this, and I just wanted to make that comment. And Nina, we miss you. Thanks for coming back for a visit.
Thank you. I just one comment before we close tonight, and one, I want to thank Greg and others that have been involved in this and brought this to the voters of Cleveland Heights. They've done a great job, and I will say that I do speak to other elected officials about this issue in other cities to try to get them to put things on the ballot, and hopefully with enough cities around the country doing this, it'll maybe make an impact in Washington. I know Senator Sherrod Brown has had petitions out there to try to get this going. So it's an important issue, and I think Greg made it a good point. It affects us here in Cleveland Heights because the legislature balanced their budget the last time by cutting funding to the city, and now we're in tough times because of that. So it all relates back to the amount of money that goes into these political campaigns. And I do have to say another thing. I don't think that a forum like this, and I appreciate the spirit of a lot of the people in this room, but I don't think a forum like this is to stand up and slander somebody. So I'm not going to just remain silent about that. I'm going to, for the record, say that nobody up here ever was offered the opportunity to buy, to sell Oakwood to Metro Parks. That's just not true. You know what? The other thing is that to suggest that all of us get contributions from everybody on the Planning Commission, I mean, it's just a lie. And, this is freedom of speech. I understand that, and I understand your passion, but when it's directed to an individual and slanders them, I just don't think that's appropriate. So,
everything I said about Oakwood was true.
All right. I'm going to conclude this hearing at, 7:13. And we will have minutes of the hearing. I'm sorry.
They have to be produced by March 1st under the ordinance.
March 1st. I think in 2 weeks we send a letter to all our elected representatives to let them know summary about what happened tonight. And
will that letter be posted on?
Yeah, we'll post it on our website, right? Yeah, we can do that. And we'll have the minutes posted as well. I think last year's minutes are posted, so we'll have this year's as well. Thank you, everybody, for coming and being here.